Tanya. Thank you, ID Symposium, for this opportunity to speak to three, I would say, important figures in understanding how does an architect practice and engage with urban systems in today's Mumbai. It's a complicated city, maximum city, as Suketu Mehta once said, and each of these individuals have really evolved extraordinary ways in which they've been trying to engage with citizens, with communities, and with the government to be able to affect some sort of change on the ground. Too often when we speak of Bombay, we usually speak through sort of this despair. The traffic is bad, there's no housing, the environment is terrible. And that can very often bring us down in a sort of defeatist mode. What I find interesting about all the three panelists that I'm sharing the stage with is that each of them have managed to turn this despair into something that is proactively engaged with the actual production of the city. So just so that we can have a more productive conversation, I felt that we could start off this entire discussion if each of them just present some of the ideas that they had about the city through some of the projects and some of the engagements that they've had. And then we can, think about what are the sorts of questions that emerge out of their conversations, and then later on throw it out up to the audience to ask questions again. So thank you again, Anuradha, Ratan, and PK for joining me on this panel. And we hope to have a kind of interesting discussion concerning the city, and especially the ways in which one can evolve an architectural practice that is able to, in many ways, engage with forces that are not that, just this discussion is so odd in a space like this, right? Because the space is about design, it's about the celebration of form, material, and all of these things. And very often when we are speaking of the city of Mumbai, we are really speaking about rasta, pavement, far more nala, right? So I find this contradiction as an interesting one I think we should be thinking about in terms of how we as practitioners in Mumbai are navigating that terrain between the world of design and the world and the city at large. So I thought what we'll do is start off with PK. PK, if you can just talk a little bit about what you have prepared for us.
Thank you, Rohan. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you all, as Rohan kind of put it very well. Living through these worlds apart, how do we deal with them? And how do we intervene to bring about change? These are some of the challenges that all of us, each one of us face in different ways, living in a complex city like Mumbai, or any city for that matter. So my call is really reclaiming the city. I feel slowly we are losing out relating to the city and being belonging to the city. So how do we reclaim our position? How do we reclaim the city? That's the call. The very first fundamental idea is really about recognition, right? It's a principle of democratic and sustainable urban development order. And it, in many ways, supports the idea of diversity. For many diversities that sort of exist around us, and it's so vital to recognize the diversity and not really get into the phenomena of invisibilization, which really is happening, or unification and uniformity. The second big thing is really our central objective is to try and achieve an open city which is inclusive, which is networked, which is sustainable. Building relationships between people and with nature. This is probably one of the most important challenges now, because our relationships are gradually eroding. We are getting into a very individualized lifestyle and society. And at the same time, we've moved away over the years, away from nature, causing destruction, rampant destruction. And now we are confronted with climate crises. So these are some of the key objectives, therefore, how to achieve an open city. The third big thing is how do we intervene? So I have just one example before you, is really coming from the idea of recognition, and the objective of establishing an open city is the whole idea of mapping and open data. Mapping and open data is really about a bottom-up process. It is prepared through area-based participation of the people because they know, we know wherever we live, wherever we work, we know our area best, right? Not any external force. And therefore, to map, to walk, to talk, to see are important aspects of the city that we must engage with. And this is what I meant by open mapping and data, and not fall into the manufactured data that is overproduced and then forced upon us. These are some examples of various mappings we've done of land use in Mumbai over the years through voluntary effort. We have the open spaces and natural areas of the city. We have the slums mapping in the middle, and we have the government-owned agency, Mahada's landholding of 2,000 hectares, and so on and so forth. So we've done many mappings, many different ways. The next point I want to bring to your attention and caution you is what I came from in visualization idea, is the act of seeing. We don't see necessarily, we don't see what we look at, thereby normalizing inequality and exclusion. We go past, we brush aside, we look over. We don't necessarily see what we look at. Looking at is an act of choice, as famously said by John Berger. We see only when we realize a relationship between them and ourselves. So we need to start seeing, not just looking. For example, we don't realize what this great city has, the kind of incredible natural assets that we have in this city, which in many ways actually supports our life in the city. We also don't see the informal economies. We don't see many people who engage, who are an integral aspect of the city's economy, as much as we don't see the natural areas. So therefore, both mapping and the act of seeing are effective democratic tools of public knowledge and intervention. What's our focus area? For me, the focus area has been 50% of the city's area. And this 50% of Mumbai's area includes the commons and the land, housing, and the slums areas of the city. 50%. The commons, what does it include? The natural areas together with the open spaces, which is 33% of the city's area, mind you. As vast as 160 square kilometers is what I'm referring to as the commons. And the current development policy is thinning out the scanty and disaggregated commons and sharpens social and spatial disparities. We have then the section on land and housing and slums, which is another 80 square kilometers, which is 33% of the developable land of the city. And these two put together, as I said, is 50% of the land or the area of the city of Mumbai. And interestingly, covers 70 to 75% of our population. So it's not just about the physical 50% of the land area, it's also 70%, 75% of the people of the city that are engaged with it. And therefore, so what's the way forward? I'll kind of conclude very quickly with this, which is to influence change, to bring about change, is expanding the commons, which are otherwise shrinking rapidly. As we know, the open spaces are shrinking rapidly. As we know, the natural areas are being destroyed and encroached upon every day. So we expand the commons. At the same time, we also develop sustainable housing or social housing so that we don't have homelessness, we don't have slums that people are forced to live in misery, and we elevate all the people and the environment in the city to a liberating extent. So the way forward is just two ways: expanding and integrating the commons, which is 16,000 hectares of land area, and connecting the dots. So to achieve that, I have three ways to go about: connecting the dots, neighborhood-based city planning, and re-envisioning the city. Finally, re-envisioning the city, recasting the city in a different way. That's the objective. So very quickly, I'm running through. Connecting the dots is really about connecting many small parts together to form one whole. So you have the waterfronts, you have the mangroves, you have the wetlands, you have roads, accesses, station squares. So how can we start intervening in each of these disaggregated and disparate spaces, disconnected spaces, and how can we connect them together? How can we network them? Because physical networking also facilitates bringing people together. It facilitates social networking. So that's one way to go about. The second really is the neighborhood-based movements, which is really addressing your own neighborhood spaces, movements built around citizens, groups, around people, which is really very, very important. And this is a bottom-up process in planning. It's not a plan that is then thrusted upon us by a master planner, maybe from Paris, London, or wherever, or somebody from within our country forced upon us. But we as people from each neighborhood build up our own plans that become together the plan of the city. And so we have the Juhu as an example, 4 square kilometer area where we worked, where we tried to connect all the natural areas and the open spaces along with KRVI. Books were brought out, etc. So re-envisioning the city finally is an idea that we call the Open Mumbai, or the Open City that I talked about, an exhibition that we had held some 14 years back, which is really about special networking that facilitates social and ecological networking and suggesting an equity-based planning process. And so this was a kind of Mumbai map. We start connecting these natural areas and open spaces. We get a 600-kilometer interconnected spaces. Imagine that. A distance from here to Goa is achievable by simply connecting these disparate bits and the fragments. And the last bit, I'll conclude with this one, which is an enormous subject. I've been working for many, many, many years from the 75s, 74 onwards, or maybe 72, 73 onwards, is about how do we create accessible and dignified social housing in the city? And how do we rid of the misery in which more than 60% of our people live in, which affects all of us, incidentally. I mean, it's not just about their issue, it's about us as well. So how can land use equity-based planning and redevelopment be the way forward? And so we have a solution to that. Imagine if I put this land together, a simple 6,000 hectares together, with just one FSI. We each day fight to increase the FSI in the city to 4, 5, 6, 8. With just one FSI, we are achieving housing of 13 lakh houses for 52 lakh people. So if you actually double the FSI, we have doubled the population that we can provide housing with open spaces, infrastructure, everything else that is required. With that, we can completely re-envision the city in both ways of its ecology, of its natural environments, and people. Thank you.
Firstly, it's nice to be included in this veteran boys club. So I don't know if any of you have heard of G5A, but it's a safe space for contemporary art and culture, and with a focus on performing arts. And what we've tried to do, in fact, it's a very special time for us because we're celebrating 10 years in November. So I feel lucky that we've been able to hang in there and continue the work we do. As some of you may know, contemporary art and culture is not high on the patrons list. And so it's extremely difficult to get the support from patrons as well as from audiences, actually. Because I think everyone, especially in a city like Bombay, there's so much of mainstream culture that is pounding down on us that spaces like G5A really need the kind of, should I say, support from audiences as well. One of the things that we also do with G5A is that we're not just a space, the warehouse, which hosts and curates and creates productions. But we also have other elements that we work through. What I'd like to say is that we also have 5 elements that we work through: the warehouse, forum. So warehouse is the space where we actually host these performances and programs. The forum is where we really begin to curate things. We look at work more closely, and then there's City Lab, which I'm going to talk to you about. And in fact, it, I think, segues well with PK's presentation and his idea of neighborhood planning. And then we have Academy and Imprint, our publication. So I guess I'll just talk. And actually, the thread tying all these is art and culture. So what we decided was, let's look at these. And I'm going to quickly talk to you about just 2 projects. So we decided that we would, while we were doing the mapping, we said that the Worli Koliwada was a cohesive pocket. It had the indigenous settlers of Mumbai, the Kolis, and it felt like there was some potential to get to work with the community, get to understand their requirements, because they were being flooded by a lot of companies, real estate companies, wanting their land. So we thought what would be good, I mean, these are words that we all are familiar with, that inclusive participatory revitalization project, bringing together the neighborhood community, the BMC ward office, and corporations. This struck me that, and here people, I guess, in this context would appreciate it, that this was, you know, amazing to see these colors coming together in a place like Koliwada. We strive with our, you know, Pantones and all of those to fix palettes. But this was just a wonderful corner that we turned upon. While I've separated these 3, if you see, there's synergy in all of them really working together. So we took the Worli Fort, and this was really sort of initiated by the BMC ward officer, Mr. Ugade. And this plan, which is beautifully drawn by Dishank, who's here, and it's obviously much nicer if it's close up, but it sort of wraps all the projects that we tried doing. Essentially, we looked at, from the architecture point of view, we looked at the entrance area, and some of you may be familiar that the Coast Guard is here, as well as Slink and Bardo. And then you have these 2 main arteries, Golfa Devi and SK Bhai Road. And then, of course, there's the Fort Precinct. And about this portion is now the original Gautan. A lot of it now we see, in fact, the Kolis are now, I think, only a 30% of the population. So we started, after having talked to them, we actually started with a lot of art and culture workshops with the community. We looked at identity in terms of also women and youth. We looked at theater for change. We looked at various art-based workshops, got to know the community a lot better. And we felt that they needed some cohesive identity and wayfinding system. This is what it used to, well, it still looks like, unfortunately. And this is what we were trying to do, is create a system. So we started with a logo, which really came about with, again, a workshop with some of the community. This was for the fort, which originally, you know, we decided we would work with the basalt stone, which the fort was built with. This was, again, a heritage part, this Cleveland jetty. And unfortunately, we couldn't get permission to work with it. This was a really fun project that we evolved together with the community, which is that we took one of the main arteries, the Golfa Devi, and what we did was we worked with the community to create a kind of toolkit for them. So what happened was that we firstly had them walk the length of this whole road, look at the various elements, and then we brought it down to, you know, the doors, the windows, the frames, and various other things, elements that we found. And we decided that we also took the colors from the Koliwada, which were the original choices by the community, rather than some parts of Koliwada which were, you know, really outsiders came and sort of put their brushstrokes. So this was the original palette, and then we segregated it, and it became quite an interesting toolkit, which, again, unfortunately, there wasn't sponsorship for. Then we looked at the fort, and fortunately, we were able to restore the fort. It's a tiny little jewel and was in reasonable shape, but we did get to do with Vikas's team, did get to restore it. This is a sweet story here. This goat that we have was very picture conscious, so she kept appearing every time we wanted to take a photo. This was a wonderful, sensitive light design that Kanchan Puri and associates came up with, but unfortunately there was a mandate for everything to be tricolor, so that's what happened. We now see Worli Fort as a tricolor building. This is one project that we were able to do quite a nice circular loop. We had the waste segregation, we had the community working with us. We created this whole cycle with them and with Sri Mukti Sangatna. This was a lovely sketch that kids from, we hosted the SEPT summer school one year, and this was where once they met with the community and they were looking at this, the morning spots that people would take for, they had identified whose spots were where. So this was a fun sketch. Then we brought in culture with community, where we basically looked at ideas of building stewardship, reinforcing roots and heritage, and facilitating sustainable practice. So these were just some, I wanted to just leave you with some of the work that we did with the community. Thank you.
I'm going to run through very quickly 5, 6 big ideas, and we'll talk as we go. It's about exactly what PK talks about, people, place. I'm going to possibilities. I'm looking at initiatives like this that can create policy, and looking at, in fact, people contributing from ground up and connecting with the governments to talk about how we can move forward. One of my projects, which we seeded about 10 years ago, was to look at BEST lands. The BEST assets have looked at development models, they look at revenue generation, they look at improved amenities, etc. Obviously, it translates to commuters' facilities, connection with other modes of transport, etc., etc. If we look at this in principle, it's one solution for Mumbai's transportation problems. And having said this, we have acres of land in the close to about 300 plus acres of land in the most prime locations in the city. And if we can use those acres of land effectively, I think that makes a huge difference to where we look at. So we give BEST what they need, which is depot upgradation, improved amenities. We look at enhanced communal facilities. And then when they're the small plots, we look at public parking and public utilities. The plots get larger, we add retail. The plots get much larger, we can add commercial. And much, much larger, we can look at staff quarters and maybe public housing. And having said this, we can stack this in principle where you have the BEST facilities which park buses. And today there is no other building except to park buses and a few offices. We can look at parking all the public transport, all the commercial buses. We can look at great improved workshop facilities, latest state-of-the-art stuff, etc. And then we look at public utilities, simple banks and this and that, and electricity, and where you can pay your bills, etc. And we stack parking on top. So in principle, you also have a 8-to-8 and an 8-to-8 syndrome, which is basically a 24-hour cycle, where you can commercialize, charge people money for parking, and make some money as a revenue stream. And having said this, we conceptualized something like this, which is primarily giving you a quick idea about how we propose to stack, how we propose to use, how we propose to enhance public transportation through commercial participation. We lost an opportunity of the mill lands. We have the eastern waterfront, God knows where that's going. I'm looking at another 300 plus acres. Can we look at this as a solution? I'm also saying that if we look at value addition, we have a sort of simple thumb rule calculation that we can park about 150 odd cars on and around a street for every 1 kilometer of road. If these cars were parked within that BEST bus stop or the bus depot, I need to design for about 600 odd cars, and we can take these cars off the road and completely change the way our roads around those BEST areas are. At least that 1 kilometer of radius or diameter becomes completely pedestrianized in terms of better footpaths, better facilities, etc. I'm going to a multimodal nodal system. I have chosen one of our projects. I mean, we've been doing these things for about the last 30 odd years, working on just initiatives for the city. And one of this was the Mahalakshmi railway station. Around the Mahalakshmi railway station, and I'm using these as familiar sort of landmarks because all of us know what we're talking about. If we built over the tracks, and this was huge confidence because I have done Kharghar railway station like this in the early 90s, where we suggested to them that we build over the tracks and do parking, public parking. And if we can bring the same thing over to all our railway stations in the city of Mumbai, that's pretty much how we can handle it. So we look at public parking. Obviously, you'll do some solar panels and you'll generate some electricity. We look at entrances for the railways. We look at all sorts of bus parking, multimodal transfers, etc. This is a very small project and an initiative to show you how it works out. On my left, on your left, is the race course, just to orient you. And on the right-hand side is Mahalakshmi. And what we have is a sort of before and after visualization very quickly. Integrated bus alighting, integrated bus boarding. We look at multimodal. We look at dedicated kiss and ride, park and ride facilities for cars. We sort of encourage public space, and we encourage people who want to drive to come and park there conveniently and then ride on the trains. Moving quickly to Jacob Circle, which is a neighbor of the Mahalakshmi station. I think all of you know it probably as Sat Rasta. It's a very interesting node, and we looked at a situation where Jacob Circle could become a complete walkability relationship, connecting Central Railway, Western Railway, the monorail terminus, MSRTC, that's the ST bus stops, the BST bus stops, Mumbai Central, etc., the suburban rail. And if we looked at a simple walkway, this is, I mean, I know walkway is a very, very bad word in our scenario, but if we looked at the connectivity of pedestrianization above roads, you could pretty much connect very easily across these nodes and get to different modes of transportation. The overall you would be walking is about 2 kilometers to go from one place to another, and that's end to end, out to out. Having said this, talking about walkability, we had a lovely concept when monorail came in, when metro rail came in. We had the opportunity to work with the stations and the improvements around that. And what we realized that if we connect Dadar to Dadar East to Vadala, we have the opportunity of actually connecting through a subway underground for pedestrians. Again, 2.3 kilometers of walk. Not necessarily everybody would be doing point to point. Some people do, unfortunately. But you give them a space where they walk through in pedestrianized conditions. We walk through, cycle through, run through, jog through, whichever way you like. Value addition versus value creation. We generated 3 BAWA, okay? That's basically beyond, sorry, let me go back. That's basically below, beyond, between, along, within, and above railway stations. And as you can imagine, this is how one can really do what we want to do extremely cheaply, extremely easily. It's a question of political will, it's a question of public will, it's a question of bureaucratic will. And of course, the railways saying yes. Having said this, we can look at all these kind of probabilities and opportunities that you have depending on the railway station type. We've studied every single railway station on the Central, Harbour and Western lines and realized that this is a completely doable project. I'm going to end this session by saying that all of us, most of us, some of us are used to and are familiar with the Western Railway, the Harbour Line, and the Central Line. A simple intervention joining Churchgate to VT station can pretty much completely rationalize all transportation in Mumbai. And this is very, very critical. It's a small intervention, hugely complicated because Western doesn't talk to Central, doesn't talk to Harbour, etc. But if you can achieve this, you'll end up establishing loops of travel, much faster delivery in terms of commuter transportation, much, much more effective in terms of signaling and strategies. Thank you.
That really showed us so many different ways in which each of you have imagined practicing in the city. Because from what I can see, most of these are self-initiated projects, every single one of these. They're self-initiated in the sense that you have a practice and you feel that you want to kind of engage with the forces that are shaping the city and are trying to find ways of doing that. And I'd just like to come back to what PK started his or maybe it was part of your presentation, this idea of re-envisioning the city. Yeah? It seemed as if each of you had some ways of re-envisioning the city. And in each of these, you found your way of communicating that vision, or trying to communicate that vision to whether that was the state or whether that was communities, and begin to think of ways of, like, I don't know, changing other people's minds as well. So in many ways, what happens is that in that re-envisioning, you're also re-envisioning your practice. Your practice itself is also taking on new roles. I found it interesting that each of you chose different modes of working, actually. We can talk about, of course, the specific proposals themselves, but given the time constraint, I thought it's nicer to talk largely in terms of the nature of the practice itself. I think that PK's imaginings of new ways of thinking about, like, exhibitions, just putting together an exhibition that shows a new way of us understanding things like nalas and slums and open spaces as really part of larger systems that changes the way we think about our neighborhoods as larger sort of patterns that we have to engage with. Well, Ratan's very specific kind of interest within public infrastructures and looking at ways in which one can rethink those infrastructures seems to be like, I would say to use Rem Koolhaas's scales, right? Extra large, large, right? While with Anuradha, the interest in specific kind of real detail, right? The idea of a logo, the place that you put it, even that begins to change the way that residents in Koriwada as well as citizens themselves think of the Koriwada. So I would like to kind of, I find this, I would just like you to respond a little bit into the ways in which you chose your modes of practice, more than the specifics itself. Like, why did you choose to do what you chose to do?
So I guess I've always believed in the fundamental power of the arts to transform our sort of deeper values. And so for me, it was a very simple choice that I felt that it's very important to connect with people. And if you want sustained change, I think, and transformation, then I think it's very important that we take the time to examine where we're coming from, the values we have, and the choices we make. So it was very important to work with a small community and to really work with them to see a long-term kind of shift.
Well, I don't know if I really made these choices. Conditions, situations compelled me to do what I did from my heart, from my mind, and from my being involved with people and places. I think that's the crux of the matter, that we need to now keep our eyes open, keep our minds open, and keep our cities open. Not keep them closed, not keep them barricaded, not keep them as exclusive areas or cities of exclusion, but how do we keep everything open to see things, to realize things, and to intervene to bring about change. So I really wouldn't say that these were my choices. These were compulsory conditions.
So I think I agree with PK. growing an organization, growing an office. As the office grew, we sort of had a department of urban design, and that department of urban design grew from 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 15 people. And in the spots where you weren't designing a project, there was these initiatives that we kicked off. Not because we wanted something to do in our spare time, but because we felt the need passionately, because we also had the opportunity. I mean, having worked with railways from 1987 onwards, and having done maybe 75 odd railway stations, you suddenly realize that you had a voice. You realize that you were sitting in the railway rooms with general managers, managing directors, very big influencers, and we started looking at these ideas to put on their tables. Understanding clearly where they were and why they couldn't do certain things, and they did what they could do, and that's also a very, very important part. It's not like nobody listens and nobody cares and nobody does. And I think that's pretty much where the initiative started. The BEST project happened because I read a small ad in some newspaper saying BEST to sell their land. And I said, what the hell, why not? How can you do that? Why should you ever sell asset? The Mahalakshmi station was on my drive every day to my office, and I realized that, I would have taken a train if I had a car park or whatever it is, and I could see huge crowds crowding up and causing traffic jams. And these were simple solutions. So this is pretty much how the practice evolved, and this is pretty much how I came back and told my guys, listen, one has to be doing this. And then it became initiative after initiative. So we have about 100 plus initiatives, and I'm going to use these opportunities to show 5 at a time. Yeah.
What I found interesting is that each of you trying to bridge that gap between the community and its more localized interests with the large bureaucracies of the state. And what are the primary challenges that you face in that? Because the languages that both of them speak can be very, very different. Do you find that kind of gap something that you have to constantly work with, or it's something that you're trying to find ways of resolving?
He puts these questions that we can't answer. Can't answer in public. Well, I think the challenges are continuously about the increasing commodification, if I may put it that way. We are beginning to assess everything that we do, everything that is happening in the city, everything around us in financial terms, in commodity terms, which can be produced and traded with. But relationships between us and us with nature don't really operate on those financial terms. There are emotions, there is a lot more than just the commodification and financialization. So, so these are complex conditions which we learn even more when we're living in urban centers, where the complexities are much more. However, these complexities cannot be conditions that we get defeated by or we get out of into our little boxes. How do we get out of these little boxes that we're constantly being pushed into is yet another challenge. So how do we get out of our little worlds of design, of little interiors of houses, to bettering environments of an entire city? These are challenges, from making a beautiful toilet to making a beautiful city. And I think these journeys we have to learn constantly to engage with. And I feel this challenge never ends with a point where you say it's all done and over. These are continuous processes that never end, and hence the battle continues forever. And none of us can state, here's the solution. For these solutions keep constantly evolving when there are larger and larger and larger groups of people engaging into that process. I think these are some of the learnings that I have sort of experienced.
What I would say is that it needs, I think we need to have a certain resilience. Anyway, a city like Bombay pushes us all to have a certain basic resilience. But I think what is important for us is to really look at and examine our work and look at the fact that we can, as PK said, if you do 10 interiors, see if we can do one city project. And I think the second thing, PK and Ratan, I think is important is that we somehow find a network. I mean, there's so much good work in our individual practices, but we don't talk to each other enough. So if there's a way that, maybe a platform like this or others can bring some of these, just do really, connect at a deeper level is, I think, something. And of course, working with the BMC is a whole other challenge on resilience.
If one took an activist stand and said this has to be done and this is what we want, it didn't work. It never works. So we need to look at a collaborative stand. There's no question about that. The collaborative is not just between the architects or designers and people and the BMC or any other authority. It's about the bureaucracy as well. It's about the politico as well. And it's only when these three align is when you get some sort of result. Because normally it's everybody pulling in different directions. Having said this, I think these were not self-imposed practices or obligations. On the other hand, I think every designer who practices in a Bombay or an India environment has to take on these public projects, has to look at being at least participative, if not contributive. And this is very important because, one can continue to do great homes and beautiful spaces. But if you look at the people and you impact them, that satisfaction really fuels a good human space. Yeah, and I think that's an important sort of message.
Anyway, thank you, PK. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everyone at ID Symposium for this opportunity. But we are hoping that we can create more such forums and increase awareness about different kinds of practices that we can have in our city. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.